When he demanded to know how, the reply came, "Because I'm you, just later." And Evan should have dismissed it as delusion, but instead he felt a strange calm, like hearing a melody you forgot you loved, and the stranger, future Evan as he reluctantly thought of him, told him that this was the last night before everything broke open, that tomorrow a fire would tear through the warehouse, that 2 men would die, that Evan would survive because he was late after oversleeping, and that the guilt would hollow him out in ways the bridge never could. And Evan felt sick, because the idea of surviving felt heavier than dying. And when he asked why he was being told this, the answer came slower this time. "Because I didn't listen." And the story unraveled from there, with future Evan describing a life that followed tragedy like a shadow, lawsuits, news vans, a brief moment where Evan was interviewed as a survivor and said something honest about being numb, which went viral, not because it was eloquent but because it was real. And for a few weeks he was invited onto podcasts, onto local TV, asked about grief and masculinity and the American promise, and he started writing again, essays at first, then stories, and people listened, and for the first time he felt seen. But the attention faded as it always does, and the guilt didn't, and future Evan admitted that he chased the high of being heard until he hollowed out the truth, turning pain into product, until one night he stood on the same bridge and jumped, and Evan felt his breath catch, because this wasn't a warning to avoid death. It was a warning about the cost of being alive without honesty. And when Evan asked if this meant he could change things, future Evan replied, "You already are." And the phone went silent, no more messages, no matter how many Evan sent, and he sat alone in his car until dawn, watching light creep into the sky like a second chance he wasn't sure he deserved. And the next day unfolded exactly as promised: sirens, smoke, news alerts, the warehouse burning like a sacrifice, and Evan stood with the other workers watching, knowing he was supposed to feel lucky, knowing luck had nothing to do with it. And in the weeks that followed he tried to follow the map he'd been given without becoming trapped by it. He wrote but didn't perform his grief. He told the truth even when it didn't sell. He turned down interviews that wanted a soundbite instead of a human. And slowly, painfully, his life bent away from the path future Evan described, but not cleanly, because stories don't change just because we want them to. And the biggest twist came a year later when Evan received an email from a woman named Clara, who said she had been archiving anonymous messages people sent themselves using a now-defunct mental health app, and she had found a string of messages timestamped years in the future that matched Evan's writing style exactly, messages sent from a device registered to a man who died by suicide, messages that included details about Evan's life no one else could know. And Clara wanted to know if Evan had any idea how this was possible. And Evan realized with a shiver that future Evan might not have been a ghost or a hallucination but something stranger. A loop created by despair and attention and technology. A version of himself reaching backward not to save a life, but to salvage meaning. And Evan agreed to meet Clara. And together they pieced together a theory that the app's delayed send feature had been exploited, that future Evan had scheduled messages years ahead, knowing exactly where he would be, betting on his own patterns, and the twist cut deep, because it meant future Evan wasn't supernatural, he was intentional. He had planned his own death and his own warning, and Evan had to live with the knowledge that another version of him had chosen the bridge even while trying to save himself. And the story doesn't end with triumph, because real American stories rarely do. It ends with Evan standing at a book signing in a small independent bookstore, reading from a novel that doesn't offer easy answers, watching people nod and cry and hold each other, and later that night he drives past the Harrison Street Bridge without stopping. Not because it no longer scares him, but because he understands now that the last exit before morning is almost never where you think it is. And the final twist, the quiet one, is that Evan keeps writing not because it saves him, but because it reminds him that he's still here, and somewhere, in some broken loop of time and intention, a version of him needed that reminder badly enough to send it back into the dark, trusting that this time someone would listen. Title: The Last Exit Before Morning. If you're American and you believe you've seen every story there is about ambition, regret, freedom, and the cost of chasing a dream, don't blink, because this one starts where comfort ends. And before you read another word, do yourself a favor and hit subscribe right now, because stories like this, raw, human, unsettling, and unforgettable, are disappearing in a world that scrolls too fast, and subscribing is how you make sure you don't miss the next truth wrapped in fiction. Now here's the story, all of it, no pauses, no mercy, no turning back. The night Evan Cole decided not to jump was the same night the entire country seemed to be holding its breath, Sirens bleeding through the humid air of a forgotten Midwestern city where factories had shut down but the ghosts still clocked in every morning. And Evan stood on the edge of the Harrison Street Bridge staring down at black water that reflected nothing back at him. Not the neon diner sign flickering behind him. Not the police cruiser idling 2 blocks away, not even his own face, because some nights America doesn't look like opportunity. It looks like an exit you're not sure you're brave enough to take. And Evan had always believed bravery was something other people were born with. The kind of people who left towns like this instead of circling them like moths trapped in a jar. He was 39, which felt older than it sounded, with a back that hurt in the mornings and a phone that never rang anymore. And as he gripped the rusted railing, he thought about how he once told his high school guidance counselor he wanted to write stories that mattered, stories that made people feel less alone, and how she smiled politely and slid a pamphlet across the desk about accounting degrees, and how 20 years later he was managing inventory at a warehouse that shipped things no one needed to people who didn't know they were lonely yet, and the only writing he did now was apology emails and resignation letters he never sent, and when his phone buzzed in his pocket he almost ignored it, because hope can be louder than despair, and sometimes that's unbearable. But the message was from a number he didn't recognize, and it said simply, "Don't jump. You're standing in the wrong place." And Evan laughed out loud, a sharp broken sound, because if there was a wrong place to end your life, that felt like proof that even now he was failing at something, and he texted back, "Who is this?" And the reply came instantly, "Someone who already did." And the bridge seemed to tilt, the night air thickening like syrup, and Evan's mind raced through explanations. Prank, scam, wrong number. But before he could decide, another message arrived. "You're not supposed to die there. You're supposed to go home first." And Evan felt something crack open inside him. Not hope exactly, but curiosity, which is sometimes stronger. And he stepped back from the railing just as a semi roared past, shaking the bridge like a warning. And when Evan looked around, there was no one nearby, just the diner humming behind him and the city stretching out in tired grids. And he typed, "Home is worse." And after a pause that felt like a held breath, the phone buzzed again. "That's what I thought, too." And Evan didn't know why, but he started walking, away from the bridge, toward his car, his hands shaking, his heart pounding with a feeling he hadn't felt in years. The sense that a story was unfolding and he didn't yet know the ending. And as he drove through streets lined with closed storefronts and faded flags, he remembered his father telling him that America was a place where you could reinvent yourself as many times as it took. But his father said that before the layoff, before the drinking, before the quiet rage that settled into the walls of their house like mold. And Evan parked outside his small rented duplex and sat there staring at the door, texting back and forth with the stranger who refused to give a name, who only asked questions that cut too close, about his mother's laugh, about the way the warehouse smelled like oil and cardboard, about the notebook of unfinished stories under his bed. And Evan realized with a chill that this person knew things he had never posted, never shared, things that lived only in his head. And when he demanded to know how, the reply came, "Because I'm you, just later." And Evan should have dismissed it as delusion, but instead he felt a strange calm, like hearing a